Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans and you're watching the John Cedars channel from The Bunker, and in this video we need to talk about the October 2019 JW Broadcasting episode, which was hosted by governing body helper Joel Dellinger. So without further ado, let's roll the first clip.
When I say the words holy and holiness, what comes to your mind? Many think of words like clean and pure. But let's change the question a little. Who comes to your mind? Likely you think of Jehovah. You might also picture Jesus Christ and the holy angels. But do you think of imperfect humans? Can humans be described as holy? Yes. We know this because humans were created in God's image. Just as we can reflect godly qualities such as love, kindness, and self-control, we can reflect holiness. How seriously should we take holiness? It's no small matter. Today, the world around us is increasing in badness. 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 13 warns that wicked men would advance from bad to worse. Undoubtedly, before the end, Satan's efforts to promote wickedness will intensify. So we must intensify our efforts to be holy and reject all badness.
You simply cannot have, on these JW Broadcasting episodes, just a straightforward talk about Christian values or Bible teachings without there being some kind of doomsday message woven into it. And we are literally within the first minute or so of Joel Dellinger's speech or sermon, whatever you want to call it. And he's telling us that the subject of holiness is connected in some way with how doomed we all are, and the fact that in these last days Satan is doing everything that he can to rob us of holiness.
Who do you think are Satan's primary targets? We are. He and the demons are like a pack of hungry lions looking to devour us. Being a publisher of the good news is a privilege that Satan seeks to attack. Are you a parent with children? Do you think Satan wants you to become unclean? Yes. He knows that devouring a family head could weaken an entire family. In the congregation, Satan would love to devour you, dear pioneers, ministerial servants, and elders. Are you in the circuit work, a missionary, a Bethelite? What a sacred privilege. But remember, it also means that we have a big target on our back. Satan and the demons would love to penetrate our clean and holy position. Doing so could impact the kingdom work or stumble others. So we can't be complacent. We must intensify our efforts to reject all badness.
We're still in the opening minutes of his talk. And gosh, this is going to a dark place, isn't it? Don't panic. We're going to try and keep things positive, but yeah, pretty much Satan wants to devour you. It's just so much paranoia, and I find it fascinating the way Joel, like so many presenters on JW Broadcasting episodes, cannot help but go into this list of positions. They can't just say, oh well, Satan wants to stop witnesses from practicing their faith and leave it at that. He's mentioned the word publisher, and then he has to start listing all of the different positions that Satan is interested in undermining, such as elder or ministerial servant or pioneer or circuit overseer. And all he's doing really is re-emphasizing just what a position-based, hierarchical, human organization this really is. It shouldn't matter what position you have if there really is a being, a celestial being called Satan, who's doing his best to devour you. But Joel is a governing body helper. He's got to where he is, presumably, undoubtedly, by being very organizationally minded and very position minded and probably doing no small amount of brown nosing. So positions are important to Joel, and therefore he assumes that positions and ranks are important to his viewers.
Consider the words human and imperfect. Today, those two words naturally go together. Imperfection is within all of us and affects everything we do. Now consider another set of words that consistently go together: Jehovah and holy. Holiness permeates Jehovah. He doesn't have to perfect holiness like we do. Everything about him is inherently clean, pure, and upright. What a contrast Jehovah's holiness is to the world around us. Today, virtually everything about human society, alienated from God, is polluted in some way, either by inherited imperfection or by outright wickedness. But Jehovah is completely removed from sinfulness. He'll never be polluted by badness. He'll never turn corrupt, immoral, or abusive.
Even if his organization will certainly turn corrupt, immoral, and abusive, which is what we find when we do any amount of digging, when we look into the policies and the teachings. We find that the organization, Jehovah's organization as it's repeatedly called, even though Jehovah is supposed to be clean, pure, and upright, the organization that carries his name or claims to represent this clean, pure, upright God is riddled with corruption, riddled with immoral teachings. Yes, they are immoral. If you're watching this as a Jehovah's Witness, it's immoral to break families apart for such trivial matters as smoking cigarettes or getting involved in professional boxing, or quite frankly, consenting adults having sex. To break up a family for that sort of reason, to suggest that consenting adults having sex is worse than manipulating a father or a mother not to speak to their child, perhaps for years or decades. I'm sorry, there is no morality there at all. Neither is there any morality in the industrial scale cover-up of child sex abuse, which incidentally, again, if you're watching this as a Jehovah's Witness, your organization has failed in a petition to the United States Supreme Court, arguing its right as a religion to keep secret records about child sex abusers. This is apparently the sort of thing we would expect from an upright, moral, pure organization. I don't see it. I don't see purity or morality in the story of Jared Scepter that we had in a previous JW Broadcasting episode. There's nothing moral or pure about killing children because you've deluded yourself into thinking that blood isn't to be used medically, even though breast milk contains millions of white blood cells. Apparently you can receive white blood cells as a baby, but not as an adult when it's a life or death matter. So no, don't talk to me, Joel, about this organization being anything different from the picture that you've painted of what Satan's world is supposed to be like, which, by the way, is a monstrous exaggeration and hyperbole when you actually get out of the Jehovah's Witness bubble, which Joel appears to be very firmly inside due to his position. You find that actually our fellow humans aren't that bad after all. Yes, there are psychopaths, but there are psychopaths inside Jehovah's Witnesses. Yes, there are liars, but there are liars inside Jehovah's Witnesses. Yes, there are selfish, greedy, unkind people, but the same can be said of some Jehovah's Witnesses. It turns out that there are good people everywhere and bad people everywhere. The only difference with an organization, an abusive organization like Jehovah's Witnesses, is that bad people are given more of a carte blanche to exercise their badness and exercise their evil, particularly when you look into the horrendous child sex abuse policy.
Jehovah's holiness is beautiful. Think about the physical world. How do you feel about beautiful things? Are you drawn to them? or repelled by them? For example, look at these landscapes. How do they make you feel? Would you like to spend time here? Can you see yourself walking here, filling your lungs with clean, fresh air? Or how about drinking from a river of pure, crystal clear water? How we yearn to live in such conditions, and we will. But have you ever wondered what it is about these images that's so appealing? Simply put, everything is pure and clean. On the other hand, if these same locations were filled with garbage, graffiti, and smog, would you still want to be there? Likely not. Pollution and filth are not attractive. What's the point? We're naturally drawn to beauty. Beauty is associated with things that are clean, pure, and bright. That's how Jehovah wants us to view His holiness. Meditating on this aspect of God's personality draws us closer to Him. And though He hates all sin, His Word confirms that He doesn't hate us. All of this stirs within us a desire to perfect holiness.
The only thing that's being stirred in me at this point is a desire to vomit when I see Joel's sort of cheesy, superficial way of talking. I know I talk about this with other JW Broadcasting presenters, but good grief, it's almost, in Joel's case, like he's like a poor man's Stephen Lett, isn't he? It's like he looks upon Stephen Lett as the ideal role model of how to talk, and even though nobody can match Stephen Lett's facial expressions, just the very kind of patronizing, slow, tedious, over-exaggerated way in which he kind of drawls through this monologue is very difficult to listen to, especially when he's saying such mind-numbing things as, oh, what aren't these beautiful pictures of rivers and lakes beautiful, and what makes them beautiful? Oh, it's because they're clean. Would you like to be in these places if they were strewn with litter? Well, it depends what you're interested in, because if you are a conservationist, perhaps you would like to be in one of these places if it was strewn with litter, so that you could clear up the litter, because it's not going to clear up itself. But this highlights the Jehovah's Witness mindset. If it's not contributing to Watchtower, then it's irrelevant. So honestly, Watchtower's approach to wildlife and conservationism is that it really doesn't matter compared to the importance of spreading their message, which is why they probably would walk past these places if there was any kind of pollution or littering that could easily be rectified by just getting a bag out and spending a few minutes walking around and making the place better.
What does it mean to perfect something? According to one dictionary, to perfect means to bring to a state of supreme excellence, to rid of faults, to improve or refine.
It wouldn't be a JW Broadcasting episode without the definition of a rudimentary word being explained to us.
As an example, perhaps you enjoy a hobby like drawing, taking photographs, or playing an instrument. If an expert in that field told you that you should perfect your talent, what would he mean? First, he's confirming that you have some experience already. Second, he's telling you, you have what it takes to be even better in the future. I can see your potential.
Am I the only one who was reminded here of that dreadful Sergey video from the 2016 Remain Loyal to Jehovah convention, the worst convention ever, when a young Sergey was basically put off perfecting his skill with the violin by his father, because this would lead to a worldly career, it would lead to lots of attention, it would lead to him being distracted away from serving Jehovah. Better to have those dreams shattered and focus instead on on doing what he can to become a drone, essentially, for the organization.
A man from the music conservatory came to our class, and my teacher told me to play for him.
Oh, and how did that go?
Well, first I was nervous. After I was done, he asked me if I could attend a program for young gifted musicians.
And what did you tell him?
I told him I'd ask you first, so can I please?
I don't think it's a good idea.
What? But why? He's just playing the violin. You and I played together, what's the difference?
The difference is, we play violin for our enjoyment. It's different with the world. The pressure to be very best is so strong. And the spirit of competition, it can become so great that it will consume you.
Although I understand what Joel's saying here about the concept of perfecting oneself, which is what he's talking about in the context of holiness, just the analogy that he's using grates with me when I consider the overt message, the overt call for young people to not learn musical instruments, to not perfect themselves in anything that won't contribute to Watchtower.
Something we read in the Bible or that we hear at a meeting may warn us that our thoughts need further refinement. Perhaps we detect a tendency toward materialism, or we realize that our precious time is being consumed by social media, surfing the internet, or playing video games. In Ephesians 4:23 and 24, we're urged to continue to be made new in our dominant mental attitude and to put on the new personality. So our challenge might be a deeply ingrained negative personality trait. A sister named Christina admitted, "I often find myself looking enviously at others. I compare what they have with what I don't have." Well, these are just a few examples, and these may not be our weaknesses, but the lesson is clear. All of us need to keep examining ourselves.
It's kind of chilling in the context of what he's saying that we need to put on the new personality. The new personality is just to be a drone of Watchtower, someone who is essentially a puppet of the governing body, which is what Joel is allowing himself to be here. It's to strip yourself really of any meaningful individuality and make your life solely about serving the organization. So that, yes, when you are in that mindset, things like social media or entertainment, or basically anything that isn't serving Watchtower in some way, is a distraction. But I would argue, and I'm no huge fan of social media, I think that it's in many ways revolutionized the world, and it's certainly been a huge boost in getting the message out about how abusive organizations like Watchtower are. But I can see the drawbacks of social media, and there are times when I need to take a step back from Twitter or Facebook because it can be quite toxic. But I'm going to be honest, I would rather spend an hour on Twitter than an hour in a Kingdom Hall meeting, or an hour going around people's houses trying to recruit them, trying to persuade them to join my religion or embrace my view of the world or view of religion. If you spend an hour on Twitter, not that I'm recommending you do that, but if you do, you're at least going to learn something about what other people's opinions are, about what's going on in the world around you, rather than simply reinforcing the belief that your view of reality alone is true and that everyone ought to agree with you, or they're essentially doomed to destruction.
Even as we strive to perfect holiness, we don't look down on people who have been molded by the world around us. In the following experience from Italy, notice how a group of young men who had a rough start in life were drawn to the truth, and what a courageous sister did to reach their hearts.
Our parents loved us, but they did it the wrong way. They would often turn violent, so we learned that way of life.
I remember that since I was young, I was afraid of coming home one day and not finding my parents together, because as far as I remember, they have always argued with each other.
So we grew up with those values and those ways of thinking that led us to become a group that was known and feared in the area because of our violent, immoral lifestyle devoted to drugs.
We had no rules.
We were people that you should stay away from.
So we're hearing the story of 6 guys from Italy who were part of some kind of gang, some kind of teenage gang. And we're going to discover that they were called on by a witness lady, and they allowed her into their apartment, mainly to make fun of her, but she persisted and actually managed to reach through to one of them in particular. And by reaching through to one of them, she eventually succeeded in causing all of them to become witnesses for reasons that we're going to discuss. But I just want to focus on the tone of this testimonial, because it's following a formula, a tried and trusted formula that Watchtower repeatedly uses, which is to paint a picture of the world outside the Jehovah's Witness bubble as being basically doomed, desperate, violent, depraved, just a total write-off, a world that will chew you up and spit you out. And to reinforce this clearly exaggerated narrative, because obviously not everybody who's not a Jehovah's Witness is taking drugs or is violent. I don't think Jehovah's Witnesses would fancy living in a world where that was really the case. I think even Jehovah's Witnesses are grateful that not everyone that they contact, not every door that they visit has behind it someone who is violent or abusive. Clearly, that's not the case. But Watchtower needs witnesses to believe that it's true. So they pick these extreme cases, or they pick these extreme stories to drive home this narrative, because it's propaganda. Propaganda is all about changing your perception of reality, making you fall for and believe in a false reality that supports the narrative of the organization that's creating the propaganda.
Maria didn't give up. She came back with an older pioneer brother who wasn't scared of us, and with courage started to preach. I really started to change my life and make progress. Immediately, I started to speak about what I was learning with all my friends. What surprised me was my mother's reaction. She wasn't happy at all. She reacted really violently. They thought that I was going mad, that I was being brainwashed. I remember they would do everything to remind me of the strong friendship that was between us. So they would put pressure on me emotionally. I had to make a choice. Although I did love them and was close to them, I made the drastic decision to tell them that from then on I would no longer be staying in their company.
If you're watching this and you've never been a Jehovah's Witness, you're just interested in learning more about the religion, I hope you're taking notes. Just this brief clip, this 1 minute that we've just seen, tells you a lot about the nature of this organization. Firstly, the guy starts off with long hair, and I hope you'll notice that as the study progresses, he ditches the long hair and has short hair. That's because the organization is obsessed with personal appearance. And if you have long hair, this is a sign that you are rebellious. This is a sign that you're seeking to draw attention to yourself. You need to get a haircut. You're not allowed to have a beard. You've got to adopt, because you're adopting the new personality that we heard about earlier. This means making your appearance as unindividual as possible, so that you're not, again, attracting attention to yourself. And I hope you notice as well the way they are normalizing this idea of abandoning friendships. And he even tries to shift the blame onto his friends by saying, oh, they tried to appeal to my emotions by reminding me of what good friends we were. And they said that I was brainwashed. Oh, perish the thought, you were brainwashed. But I stood strong and basically broke off all my contact with my friends because they wouldn't join me initially in this religion that I'd been duped into joining. That is what the religion requires of you. I'm sorry. It's not something that's inclusive. It's not something that's tolerant. It's literally a decision that you make to part yourself from the world, to distance yourself from anyone or anything that might be a distraction. And in this case, because his friends were classed as bad association, he was required to shun them if he wanted to advance as a Jehovah's Witness. And bizarrely, by doing this, by basically acting in a toxic and abusive way towards his dear friends, this prompted them to be interested in joining the religion themselves.
His determination really made me think. It was obvious that the things he was telling us were actually real. It was the truth. And also the strength he took to go forward with this. His determination to leave his friends was surely what made all of us seriously interested in the message he was preaching.
I would blame it on the truth because it was taking my friend away from me, a friend with whom I used to do the things I liked. However, inside I knew, even though I told him he had gone mad, I knew inside that there must have been something powerful. Because he was so convinced, and we could all sense his conviction. So I realized that there was really something there.
To my surprise, one after the other, all of my friends started studying the Bible.
As I studied, I realized that it was the truth. It used to be hatred that always motivated my choices. Now I act according to love, and this makes me feel good.
I can now say that, thanks to Maria and Francesco, Jehovah tried to draw me to him. I believe it's been a miracle from Jehovah.
The truth helped me cultivate the qualities of peace and joy, the personality that has made it possible for me to have the family I never had.
The greatest satisfaction I have in life is to have a relationship with Jehovah.
When I see someone like we used to be, I feel motivated to speak to them. The patience that Maria showed motivates me to be patient.
Despite our reputation, Maria did not give up. She showed us that in Jehovah's eyes, no one is beyond recovery. No one.
Before they found the truth, those young men were, as they put it, people you should stay away from. Would you have hesitated to give a witness? Our sister Maria didn't. And did you notice what our brother did when he embraced the truth? He went to his friends and broke off his association. He knew he needed friends who shared his determination to serve God. So do we.
Joel is just so deluded. He has a level of delusion that you need, quite frankly, if you're going to be a governing body helper, that he's picking on the most obnoxious aspect of this story as though it's something to be proud of. Oh, did you notice how readily our brother broke off ties with his dear friends? How prepared our brother was to shun those who don't see things the way we see things. Joel thinks this is fantastic. I would argue that that's the most disturbing aspect of the story, and in a way I'm glad it's there, if only so outsiders again can see that this is the nature of the religion we're dealing with. As for the fact that you have all of these guys joining the religion in response to their friend walking out on them, I mean, I'm no psychologist, I'm no expert on these things, but it looks to me a little bit like herd mentality. So one person gets involved in a cult and says, actually, guys, I'm not having anything to do with you unless you join me. One member of the group actually says, you know what, let me at least look into it. And then they get roped in. And because two of this group of, 6 people are involved, then one by one, they all start to get involved. I mean, imagine you're the 6th person and all 5 of your friends have got involved. You're the odd one out. You're going to at least think, well, maybe it's worth just sitting down and having a study and seeing what all the fuss is about. This is herd mentality. It's like recently my family and I went into Zagreb to go to the zoo, and half of the city was closed down due to some kind of bike race, and there were no directions as to where we should go. And the directions on my Google Maps were irrelevant because Google Maps didn't know which roads were closed down. It literally became a case of guessing which way to go. And what you do when you're guessing along with lots of other people who are guessing, you follow which way the cars in front of you are going because you assume that they maybe know the area better. But you have no way of knowing that. You're just putting your trust in them. They could lead you down a total dead end, but you just see the other cars going in that direction and you think, well, what have I got to lose? Worst case scenario, I get a little bit more lost. Let's at least stick with the pack. It's this herd pack mentality that's kind of part of our DNA. And I think that's the reason why these guys all got involved, because one of them did. And what's interesting is you hear them describing their reasons for getting involved in Jehovah's Witnesses, and nobody is coming up with a good reason. Their reasons amount to, oh, well, we saw how convinced he was, and based purely on how convinced he was, we figured, well, there must be something to this. That is not a good reason to join any religion, just because you see people are convinced. But by the same logic, you should be joining just about any religion, because in any religion, you will encounter people who are absolutely convinced that theirs is the one and only truth. You do not join religions because of how convinced people are. You join a religion because it's true. And none of the reasons given in this testimonial amount to anything remotely close to justifying why someone should get involved with Jehovah's Witnesses.
After I got married and had children, I had a hard time explaining the backgrounds of some Bible characters or biblical history when I studied the Bible with my children. Then I realized that I did not have enough Bible knowledge. The study article, Move Forward as a Spiritual Person, in February 2018, was a big help. The expressions, once we have identified areas for improvement, we need to take positive steps, and that it is a life and death matter, really touched my heart. I realized that I needed to scrutinize my life seriously and make improvements for my own future and that of my family. I took time when reading Bible accounts to meditate on how I would feel if I were one of those Bible characters. I can now explain things better at my children's study. I'm very happy to see my children truly enjoying Christian activities. My son started doing play meetings for fun. My daughter loves the ministry. She talks to people willingly, not because we as parents are telling her to do so. Compared to how it was when I was a child, things are totally different now. And that really makes me happy.
We've just been watching a few clips from a segment called Lessons from the Watchtower. We have had this segment before. This is the latest version of it. And they basically focus on 2 or 3 individuals and a particular problem that these individuals have faced and how they've overcome it by using the lessons from their study of the Watchtower magazine. In this case, we have a gentleman who felt inadequate because he didn't feel his Bible knowledge was up to scratch, and he felt, to have a good Bible knowledge in order to indoctrinate his children. That's what all of this is about. I'm not so sure about the Bible, but I guess it's the truth. And because it's, I suppose, the truth, I really ought to be, I guess, I don't know, indoctrinating my children into it. It's a really backwards way of doing things if you think about it. Either you're sure about it or you're not. But this guy's approach to learning about the Bible is simply to read Bible stories and try and put himself in the position of the Bible characters. I really don't think that's a serious approach to take in Bible scholarship. It's a very simplistic way of approaching the Bible. I mean, at least go on Wikipedia, for goodness sake, and see what the origin of these books are. Who wrote them? When were they written? What was the purpose of them being written? These are all questions that serious Bible scholars seek to answer. And Watchtower's approach to Bible scholarship is meditate on the characters and try and put yourself in their shoes. It's just an absolute joke, and actually not a very funny joke when you consider what the end game is. The end game, at least in this case, is to rope future generations into this whole farce and to convince yourself that just because the children aren't complaining about preaching to people, preaching to total strangers, that must mean they're enjoying it. That must mean they're doing it freely. I think it might have something to do with the caption that we see here, which is actually very telling, considering I still get people now and then commenting on my videos and saying, oh, it's not the doomsday group that you paint, Lloyd. This isn't a group that says you're going to die if you don't follow us. Well, what does this quote say? We need to take positive steps. It is a life and death matter. And this guy wonders why his children are so enthusiastic to follow in his footsteps. Maybe it's because they're terrified. Maybe it's because they are convinced through the indoctrination they've been receiving that if they don't do what mummy and daddy say, they are going to die.
The article had a quote from Brother Barr that said, "Many fail because they are not diligent enough to grow mighty." This made me think, am I mighty enough to overcome any challenges that might come up, difficulties with brothers and sisters, in a way that pleases Jehovah? To move ahead as a spiritual person, I realised I needed to get Jehovah's thinking on matters and really look at Bible principles, and that means letting go of my pride when it comes back, letting go of it again, and really making Jehovah's thoughts my own thoughts. Having the mind of Christ has helped me in my assignment because it's helped me to form really close friendships with the brothers and sisters in my congregation, and that's brought me a lot of joy in my service. And also, when I don't know what to do, which often happens, I have Jehovah's principles to guide me, and that makes me feel safe and secure.
When I don't know what to do, I have Jehovah's principles to guide me. Isn't that what Watchtower is all about? Convincing people that they have the answers. Convincing people that if there's any uncertainty, any kind of confusion, don't worry. Jump on Watchtower Online Library. Put in a few keywords and all of the answers will present themselves to you. But I found it interesting when this lady is quoting from a governing body member, John Barr, who is obviously deceased. We've reached the point where the words of governing body members are being quoted as though they are scripture.
Often, honest self-examination reveals the root cause of something we need to adjust. We'll see that in the following dramatization.
I embarrassed my wife tonight. I knew when it happened. And I didn't want to talk about it. But I knew in my heart that Yumi was right. I had become unkind. There were lots of examples. I'd complained about the way one brother conducts meetings for field service. I was jealous of a ministerial servant who received new privileges. And I was pretty blunt about how frustrated I get with Yumi's parents. I thought I'd gotten rid of my old personality, but it still lurked inside of me.
This goes back to what we were talking about before, where Joel Dellinger referred to the scripture in Ephesians about putting on the new personality. If there's any unpleasantness, if someone is behaving in an unpleasant way, or being unkind or thoughtless, or making any kind of mistake, really, this is because they are not putting on the new personality. They're not doing things Jehovah's way. It couldn't simply be a case of, we're all human, we all make mistakes from time to time. I'm pretty sure governing body members say thoughtless things from time to time. It doesn't matter how good you are as a Jehovah's Witness. It's irrelevant, quite frankly. People of any religion, of any background, say things that they regret. But the root cause here, apparently, is one man not applying himself properly to his religion, so that he has to sit down with his wife and research Watchtower Publications on how he can be a better man. That's the solution. But how melodramatic this whole tone of this dramatization is. I mean, frankly, the music that they've chosen could be in a crime drama. We could be surveying a scene of utter carnage with the sort of music that they've chosen. People could have been doing unspeakable things to each other in organized crime or something, but they've chosen this music to go along with a narrative to describe someone saying unpleasant things about his in-laws, feeling jealous about someone, and criticizing someone's style of conducting meetings for field service. And this sort of stuff warrants this very dramatic, very over-the-top choice of soundtrack, as though a tragedy has unfolded or is about to unfold.
What do you think I need to do to change?
How about we search for Good for Building Up from the online library?
Sounds good. Let's take a look.
Watchtower Publications have the answer for everything. What do I need to change? I know, let's go to Watchtower Online Library and we'll search the words good for building up, and that will give us the magic wand to fix you being an imperfect person and saying thoughtless things about your in-laws. It's just so over the top, so unrealistic. And for me, it's typical of the sort of guilt tripping that you find in this sort of propaganda. Propaganda that's quite frankly painting an entirely unrealistic, unattainable standard that witnesses are expected to reach for.
We considered Ephesians chapter 4, verse 29, which says, "Let a rotten word not come out of your mouth, but only what is good for building up to impart what is beneficial to the hearers." I was struck by this powerful word picture. Rotten words are as disgusting as rotten food. I didn't want the things coming out of my mouth to disgust my wife or anyone else.
I don't think I'll ever forget that image of the rotten fruit. But isn't that the point? No one wants their words and conversations to be like that. We want to perfect holiness with clean conversations.
I'm hoping at least some of you will have seen my recent video on televangelism, in which I chart the slide of Jehovah's Witnesses very much into televangelism, despite spending decades criticizing other religions for investing time and resources into creating very manipulative videos and movies. Well, that's exactly what the organization is now doing. And in the televangelism video, I feature footage from a meeting that was filmed at Mount Ebo, which is basically the massive studio where Watchtower films many of its productions. The leaked footage that I included in my televangelism video, dated to February 2017 when it had only just opened. Mount Ebo is effectively the Hollywood for Jehovah's Witnesses, and it will continue to be Hollywood for Jehovah's Witnesses up until, I believe it's 2026, when they will unveil, finally, their new media center, which will rival Warwick, the headquarters, in terms of the size of the facility. But with Mount Ebo in mind, I want to take you back to this clip in which we see a young lady, presumably in ancient Israel, and she walks up to a basket of grapes and picks some of them up, and they're rotten, and she has a look of disgust on her face. This is, I've counted it, this is an 18-second clip, almost certainly filmed at Mount Ebo. It looks like it's been shot in an indoor studio. I can't think of why they wouldn't use Mount Ebo to create this scene. It's 18 seconds long. Look at how much trouble they must have gone to create this room, to fill it in with props, to create the costumes, to cast an actress, set up the lighting, the equipment they've used, the time, the labor, and everything for 18 seconds, which is apparently needed for Jehovah's Witnesses to understand the concept of rotten fruit. This just seems to me to be a monumental waste of time and resources. Why does Mount Ebo, or wherever this was shot, why does the Audio-Visual Services Department need to spend dedicated funds? Why does it need to spend Caleb and Sophia's ice cream money on 18 seconds of highly produced footage, the purpose of which is just to show Jehovah's Witnesses what rotten fruit looks like? Imagine you're watching this as a Jehovah's Witness who's having to travel an extra 20-30 minutes to the meeting in the midweek or at the weekend because you've been reassigned to a newly merged congregation because your old Kingdom Hall has been shut down so that Watchtower can save costs. And this apparently is where the saved money is going. They're using the money that they've saved in inconveniencing you so that they can create scenes like this to remind witnesses of what rotten fruit looks like.
My first contact with witnesses was in my 20s. As my knowledge increased, I made drastic changes. I quit smoking, stopped swearing and using drugs. I also changed my violent behavior. I completely gave up martial arts, and then I was baptized as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. It was an amazing day that I will never forget. Shortly after my baptism, I became quite involved in my work at the theater. The environment there was very immoral, you know. Even after several loving warnings from the brothers in the congregation, advising me to look for another job, I choose not to follow their advice.
I'd worked there for a long time, so I thought, I can handle it. But I was wrong. My conscience became dull, and I committed a serious sin against Jehovah. When I left the truth, several offers came my way. I became a manager at a nightclub that was open until 6 in the morning. It was a lot of parties, and it was a lot of drugs. I also resumed martial arts. I came in contact with serious criminals and gradually became friends with the most influential person in the criminal underworld in Oslo. Eventually, I was in prison for my violent behavior.
Witnesses are again here being told that outside of their bubble, outside of Jehovah's organization, there is just depravity and drugs and violence and people abusing their bodies or abusing others. There's nothing good or pure or decent, apparently, outside of Watchtower's walls. When again, this is manifestly not true. It's very clearly the case that there are good, kind people who don't give in to drugs outside of the organization. But for me, even though that's the intended message, the message that I take from this is a consequence of shunning that doesn't get enough attention, I believe. When we talk about shunning, we tend to talk about the psychological impact of being cut off from one's family. In this case, I'm not sure that this guy did have so much of a psychological impact. It seems that he joined the organization when he was 20. Presumably his parents, I don't know, but presumably his parents weren't witnesses, so he didn't have to worry about being shunned by them or anything. I'm guessing here that he was shunned. If he was shunned by anyone, it was just by the witnesses that he'd met from when he was 20 onwards. The negative impact of being disfellowshipped here lies not so much in the shunning and in the ostracism, but in his perception that he was worthless, that there was nothing to live for anymore, and that it really didn't matter how deep down the rabbit hole he went. It didn't matter whether he got involved in organised crime or not, because he was essentially doomed anyway. I'm fairly certain that this individual will have been disfellowshipped while still believing, while still being indoctrinated into thinking that if Armageddon were to come tomorrow, he was going to die. And when you have this nihilistic view of your life and of the world in general, what's stopping you from getting in all sorts of trouble, from getting involved in organised crime? If you loathe yourself enough to believe that you're worthy of death any moment, what exactly is going to stop you? So although Watchtower is using this guy's story to scare witnesses into thinking that all sorts of terrible things are going to happen if they ever step into Satan's system of things, the only lesson I'm getting is that disfellowshipping messes with people in more ways than simply the shunning and simply the ostracism. It also makes people think that they are doomed and worthless. And when people feel that way about themselves, they can get involved in all sorts of self-destructive behavior.
A Christian movement visited the prison where I was, and all of the inmates were invited to an event where there would be cake served. That sounded very interesting. I was tempted by a cake. They also played music, but after a while they started speaking in tongues, and I felt very uncomfortable. I didn't want to be involved in that, but I couldn't get up. Even though I was big and strong back then, I physically couldn't stand up from my chair. I've experienced a lot in my life, but at that moment I was genuinely scared. So I cried out to Jehovah, and immediately I was released and I was able to get up and leave. This big man was now in a fetal position crying. And then I called my wife and asked her to bring me a Bible and some literature, I had to start studying again and draw close to Jehovah.
It was only in a recent JW Broadcasting episode that we had similar material dealing with spirits and demonism, this time in a dramatization where witnesses were basically instructed what to do if they had a Bible study that was under attack by demons because the Bible study had put a magic charm on their baby. This is the sort of nonsense that is now becoming normal for these JW Broadcasting episodes. Look, I understand that there will be a significant percentage of you watching this who will take these sorts of stories seriously. I just think it's interesting that we're getting this story without any opportunity at all to apply the scientific method to find out objectively what was happening when this guy had this experience. I have actually had a similar experience. I woke up one morning and couldn't move, and I thought I could get out of bed, but I couldn't. And by trying to get out of bed, all that happened was that I ended up on the floor, completely paralyzed and unable to move. And I stayed on the floor for I think a couple of hours before I was finally able to at least get off the floor and be more comfortable. And what had happened was I was experiencing sciatica. I still have sciatica, but this was a particularly potent attack of sciatica that effectively paralyzed me. I'm not saying that what this guy experienced was sciatica. I'm giving an example in my own life of where something like that has happened and it hasn't been the demons, or it hasn't been the spirits, or it hasn't been the supernatural. It's been a medical condition. And really, what's more likely, if you happen to be on the fence about this, what's more likely that he happened to be experiencing some kind of medical condition at that moment, or that there were beings from another realm who felt that the most productive use of their powers was not to deliver some kind of message or manifest themselves in some kind of compelling way that would cause lots of people to take notice and listen to their message. No, the way that they needed to use their powers, these celestial beings, was to stop someone from getting up from their chair. That was their way of involving themselves in the physical realm and doing their thing. I'm sorry, it just doesn't make any sense, but it is conceivable that this guy has some kind of medical condition that manifested itself at that time. Perhaps he was having some kind of reaction to medication that he was taking at that time. Who knows, it could have been any number of things. But because it suits Watchtower's narrative for this to be demons, for this to be an attack by Satan, because he was outside the organization and terrible things had to be happening to him so that witnesses watching this can be compelled to stick closer to the organization. Oh, well, let's infer that it was the demons that were behind this attack.
I was very nervous at first, but when I entered the Kingdom Hall, that feeling just disappeared. God's Spirit is here. The way the brothers and sisters acted towards each other was such a contrast to my former lifestyle. We feel deeply blessed by Jehovah. Of course, you make mistakes once in a while, but now I feel confident that Jehovah is merciful.
I'm glad that he has family and friends who are around him, who are making him feel safe and content and secure. I'm glad that he's no longer involved in organized crime. I'm glad that he's no longer involved in drugs. I'm just not remotely convinced that he can't have all of these things without convincing himself that everybody who doesn't believe as he believes deserves to die. That's the side of this propaganda that you're never going to hear. This terrifying doomsday vision in which billions of men, women and children are slaughtered in the biggest act of genocide the universe will ever have seen, so that this guy and others like him who follow a bunch of dudes in New York can repopulate the planet. Let's not focus on that vision just yet. Let's focus on his family and the fact that he can have friends round to his house, all of which are things that he can enjoy without believing that those who don't agree with his beliefs deserve to die.
Today, some of the greatest challenges are faced by our young people. This month's music video was made especially for them. It's entitled, Fight the Fine Fight of the Faith.
Some days I feel I've had enough. The war in my mind can get so tough. There's days I feel there's no way out. In a flood of tears, I'm sinking down. In my despair, he sees me through. I know just what to do. I need his words of truth. I can hear Jehovah saying, ooh, just a little while longer. And ooh, and I will wipe out every tear. Ooh, just a little while longer. The new world is in sight. Just keep on holding tight. I'll help you win this fight, fight. I'll help you win this fight.
So yes, I'm afraid it's another cringeworthy music video, and if you happen to have been raised as a Jehovah's Witness and you are triggered easily, I don't recommend watching the whole thing. Gosh, it really takes you back to the experience of going through the school environment under the assumption that you are responsible for the lives of your classmates. That's what school is all about when you are a Jehovah's Witness. You don't just go there to learn. You don't just go there to increase your knowledge and prepare for a future career. You're doing those things, sure, but you're also convinced that if you don't preach to your classmates when the situation presents itself, if you don't capitalize on opportunities and indeed forge opportunities to preach to people to the extent possible, then you're toast when Armageddon comes. This was exactly the mindset that I had as a Jehovah's Witness in high school. And the really sad thing is that it only serves to perpetuate the bullying. And I'm not saying it's right that school children should bully other school children for any reason, let alone because they are religious or trying to push their religion on others. There are clearly healthier ways of dealing with someone who's doing that. But it's just a fact of life that school children are horrible to each other. It's a fact that when you are in school, the more you stand out and the more you make yourself different, the more likely it is that people are going to bully you and attack you and make you feel bad. But Watchtower doesn't care about any of those things. They are only interested in their agenda. They are only interested in recruiting from school children, which is why they send their school children into school with the understanding that they're not just there to learn, they're there to preach. And this music video is a celebration of that. It is showing this girl who is taking any opportunity, even carrying around a leaflet with her seemingly all the time. Apparently that's what Jehovah's Witness kids are supposed to do. Just carry around with their books a leaflet so that they are announcing to the world what their religion is. And they are supposed to exploit the fact that they are in a school environment and treat it as though it is their field ministry territory. and use any opportunity to recruit people, to distribute Watchtower literature, to use their education to Watchtower's advantage. This is how self-serving this organisation is. Kids cannot simply be kids. School cannot simply be about learning. Everything revolves around the needs of the governing body and the need to recruit and the need to swell the ranks of Jehovah's Witnesses.
The Bible is a modern-day treasure. It reveals the satisfying truth about God, life, and our hope for the future. What's more, it contains another priceless treasure, God's personal name, Jehovah. How Jehovah preserved his name in the Holy Scriptures against all attempts to remove it is a fascinating story. And it's told here in the Bible Museum at World Headquarters in Warwick. Let's take the tour. At the museum's entry, the divine name is shown in various languages a total of 7,216 times. That's how many times it appears in the New World Translation of the Holy Scriptures. Jehovah always made his name known, even to the very first humans. When Cain was born, Eve declared, "I have produced a male child with the help of Jehovah." After that time, people knew and used God's name. The oldest example of the divine name in Hebrew letters is on the Moabite stone from the 9th century BCE. Moabite King Mesha boasted against Israel, "I took from it the vessels of Jehovah and offered them before Chemosh."
So we're here getting a virtual tour of the Bible and the Divine Name exhibit at Warwick headquarters. I happen to have been round this exhibit. If you've seen my video, Warwick, A Journey to My Former Faith. So I'm familiar with the layout, and you do indeed have a couple of corridors filled with old examples of Bibles and a number of displays. I find it interesting that they are here telling us about the Moabite stone as being an early, or the earliest example of the Hebrew Tetragrammaton, which Jehovah's Witnesses render as Jehovah. And they tell us that the Moabite stone dates back to the 9th century BCE.
On the Moabite stone from the 9th century BCE.
What's interesting is that when you read the organization's literature, and I actually mentioned this in a recent video, Watchtower insists that the Bible writing began in 1513 BCE. This is from page, let's see here, 295 of the book, All Scripture is Inspired of God and Beneficial. And at the top of the page there, we're told that in 1513 BCE, that's when Moses compiles Genesis in the wilderness. Bible writing begins, it says. The trouble is, there is no evidence of this. This is just a claim that Watchtower makes, while at the same time admitting in this video that the earliest recorded use of the Tetragrammaton wasn't until the 9th century BCE. And incidentally, you can quite easily look up this Moabite stone, otherwise known as the Mesha Stele, on Wikipedia, where we find that it dates to, more precisely, around 840 BCE. So more than 670 years after the date Watchtower is putting forward as the beginning of Bible writing is when you have the first example of the divine name being inscribed on something. And rather than it being a Bible text or a fragment or anything like that, it's a stone that was put up by the king of Moab, boasting about the fact that he's been able to desecrate items or remove items that were associated with worship of Yahweh. This is the earliest reference. This was apparently how Jehovah wanted his name to be introduced, not in a Bible manuscript, not in any particularly noble terms, but in the boasting of a king that has desecrated worship of Yahweh. And look, I get that there are many of you watching who consider the Bible to be the Word of God. That's absolutely fine. But surely we need to agree on the importance of Bible scholarship, on the findings of historians and archaeologists. And if they're telling us, look, there is no evidence at all that the Bible writing began in 1513, if they're telling us that it instead began in the 8th, 7th, mostly in the 5th century BCE is when the majority of the Old Testament was written, according to Bible scholars, why would we doubt them? And what's interesting is when Watchtower is trying to authenticate the Bible as a way of validating their use of the name Jehovah, they end up basically supporting unwittingly what archaeologists are saying, because the earliest example they can find of the use of the name Yahweh doesn't date to 1513, doesn't date to any years remotely around that date, but dates to over 670 years later in the writings of a pagan king.
This silver scroll from the 7th century BCE is the earliest known inscription of a Bible text containing God's name. It reads, "May Jehovah bless you and keep you. May Jehovah make his face shine on you." Most important, God's name was in ancient copies of the Bible text. The Fuad Papyrus from the 1st century BCE is a fragment of the Greek Septuagint, the first known translation of the Hebrew scriptures into Greek. Here's Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 3. "For I will declare the name of Jehovah."
You can say lots of things about these early fragments, but what you absolutely can't say is that they use the name Jehovah, because the word Jehovah, as can be easily established by, again, consulting Bible scholars, the word Jehovah is a made-up English word. It dates to, I believe, the 12th century. Raymundus Martini, a Dominican monk, that's the earliest known usage of the word Jehovah, but it's a mishmash of English, Latin. It's just a guess by someone in the 12th century at how the divine name might be roughly converted into a European language. It's simply not what the Bible says. What the Bible does say and what the Bible does include, there's no arguments here. The Bible does include the Tetragrammaton, but you simply cannot say and be taken seriously that Jehovah is the most accurate way of expressing the Tetragrammaton in the English language, just because that happens to be the way that the divine name appeared in the King James Version, and it was the King James Bible that Charles Taze Russell used when he was first founding the religion that would later go on to become Jehovah's Witnesses.
Greek-speaking Jews in Jesus' day used the Septuagint. So when Jesus read and taught from the scriptures, people heard him use the divine name. Sadly, though, by the 3rd century CE, God's name was removed from the Septuagint and replaced with the title Lord. As an example, the Vatican Codex from the 4th century CE includes the text of the Greek Septuagint but omits God's name. Deuteronomy chapter 32 verse 3 here reads, "For I will declare the name of the Lord." But Jehovah wouldn't allow his name to be lost. It was never removed from Hebrew copies of the Bible. The Aleppo Codex was copied by Jewish scribes around the year 930 CE. The same verse, Deuteronomy chapter 32 verse 3, says in Hebrew, "For I will declare the name of Jehovah." Still, for centuries, most people didn't have a Bible in their own language, nor one that contained God's name.
For centuries, people didn't have a Bible in their own language. For centuries. Now, again, I understand there are lots of people watching this who are believers, who are Christians. Fine. I hope you'll understand if I just explain or give you one example of why atheists like myself find it difficult to take the religion seriously once we take a step back and apply critical thinking. We're here being told very casually that literally for hundreds of years people did not have access to God's message to mankind. And apparently this was all part of God's plan. Well, if it was all part of God's plan, that for centuries his message to mankind would not be accessible, so that people were completely in the dark, had no clue, had no way of questioning the teachings that were passed down to them by the clergy or what have you. How is this an efficient means of disseminating divine wisdom if you are God? It seems to me an entirely inefficient way. I mean, what's the point of inspiring a Bible to begin with if you're going to allow it to be inaccessible to centuries of people, if generations of people are going to be in the dark completely as to what you expect of them? God has control over this. He can maneuver events to be very different, so that even though the world isn't perfect, even though there is wickedness and suffering, at least people have access to his thoughts and his wisdom. But no, generations of people didn't have this message. And this apparently was all deliberate, the optimum way of leading mankind to salvation.
The New World Translation of the Holy Scriptures was first published between 1950 and 1960. Its translators benefited from the scholarly work of those before them who had chosen to preserve God's name in their Bible translations. Today, the New World Translation is available in whole or in part in over 170 languages. God's name, Jehovah, belongs in the Holy Scriptures he inspired. This gallery holds just a small part of the overwhelming evidence to this fact. The Bible is a precious gift from God, teaching us about his works, his qualities, and his loving purpose for humankind. He invites each of us to read it, to draw close to him, and to know him by his most holy name, Jehovah.
Again, I would dispute, and I think most Bible scholars would dispute, that the rendering of the Tetragrammaton is Jehovah. I think even Jehovah's Witnesses accept that scholars use Yahweh instead, but they allow themselves, through all sorts of logical gymnastics, to instead believe that an outdated, obsolete, Frankenstein's monster of a word that was dreamt up by a Catholic monk in the 12th century is actually a closer approximation of God's name. But look, I would also take issue with this notion that reading the Bible is a surefire way of convincing you that Christianity is true. This is actually one of the irritating things, in case you're interested, you believers, that theists tend to say to atheists like me. They say, well, if only you read the Bible. Give the Bible a chance, Lloyd. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Just because you've had a negative experience with Jehovah's Witnesses doesn't mean you shouldn't give Jesus a chance, and if you read the Bible it will all become clear. No, it's reading the Bible on its own terms without making any excuses for it that has got me to atheism. And I don't want to go into it all now because that's not the purpose of this video. But if you're interested in just a few of my objections to the Bible, check out these two videos that I've done on verses in the Old Testament and the New Testament, that convince me personally that the Bible is certainly no supreme moral authority. But having said all that, for those of you out there who are still believers, it is worth noting that it isn't a case of atheism or Jehovah's Witnesses. There are clearly many who are able to take the Bible seriously as the Word of God, and in their own way respect the Tetragrammaton without believing that 99% of the world's population deserves to die if they don't follow 8 dudes in New York.
We close with a visit to our brothers and sisters in Puerto Rico. But its location in the Caribbean puts Puerto Rico in the path of tropical storms and hurricanes. One of the most powerful ever, Hurricane Maria, struck 2 years ago. Lives were lost and homes were destroyed. The entire island lost electricity for months. To help with relief efforts, thousands of brothers and sisters from Puerto Rico and from across the United States branch territory volunteered. They repaired and rebuilt 106 kingdom halls, 2 assembly halls, and more than 800 homes of our brothers.
So here we have the typical conclusion to a JW Broadcasting episode, which is to focus on a certain country somewhere around the world and show how international the organization is. In this case, we're being taken to Puerto Rico, and mention is made of Hurricane Maria, which did cause extensive damage and loss of life. Now, the way in which this disaster is mentioned is interesting for 2 reasons. Firstly, I can only repeat what I've said in many previous rebuttals, which is that Watchtower's approach to disaster relief work is really nothing to be proud of. When you have an organization that is only looking after its own, because that's really all the disaster relief work is for, it's to look after Jehovah's Witnesses. And we heard there about kingdom halls, assembly halls, and homes of Jehovah's Witnesses being the focus of this work. How is this really anything to be proud of when you read the parable of the Good Samaritan and you understand its meaning? I've obviously been talking just now about how I don't really respect the Bible as an atheist, but there are certainly parts of the Bible that I can draw value from. It's man-made, but that doesn't mean that there is no wisdom in it. And the parable of the Good Samaritan, in my view, is the most beautiful part of the Bible because of its uniquely secular message. When the man was stricken, lying by the side of the road, it wasn't members of his own religion that came to his rescue. It was someone from another religion entirely that came to his rescue and went above and beyond in making sure he was okay. Watchtower ignores that message entirely, and their disaster relief work seems to be aimed almost exclusively, and I'm sure there will be the occasional exception, but it's aimed almost exclusively at helping out Jehovah's Witnesses, and more specifically helping out the organization, because we've heard there about the focus on kingdom halls and assembly halls, which, let's remember, are Watchtower assets. And this brings me to the second thing that I wanted to say about this. I hope you noticed the part where we're told that thousands of witness volunteers, both from Puerto Rico and from mainland United States, repaired and rebuilt 106 kingdom halls and 2 assembly halls.
They repaired and rebuilt 106 kingdom halls, 2 assembly halls.
Now, just the other day, I had an email through from a friend of mine, a subscriber to the channel, who said, "Hi Lloyd, did you hear 50 plus kingdom halls are up for sale in Puerto Rico? See estate agents listing." And I opened up the link. Here it is. This is a legit estate agent's website, I've had it checked out by a friend who's originally from Puerto Rico, and sure enough, they are selling 54 Kingdom Halls on here with prices ranging all the way up to $375,000 for one of these Kingdom Halls. So what's happened here is Watchtower is bragging about the fact that they rebuilt 106 Kingdom Halls in 2017, and only 2 years later, more than half of them are for sale. And bear in mind, we don't know how many, if any, have already been sold, and we don't know whether there are any plans to sell any more. But what we can say is that of these Kingdom Halls, half of them are already for sale. What does that tell you about this organisation? Number one, they're quite clearly being disingenuous in bragging about doing this disaster aid work when clearly the goal is to make money from it, because they're immediately selling these properties. And number two, they are taking advantage of a natural disaster to bring in thousands of volunteers who are working for free on the assumption that they are rendering a service to their brothers, when all Watchtower apparently is interested in is using this natural disaster to make a quick buck. Honestly, this is the evil of the organisation that we're dealing with here. This is the dishonesty. This is the level to which Jehovah's Witnesses are being taken for granted and exploited. And if you think that Puerto Rico is an exception, I would urge you to check out my video, Unrighteous Riches, because this just demonstrates in one territory what is actually happening worldwide. Watchtower is realising that for decades they've been sitting on enormous wealth in the form of the buildings that they have control over, i.e. the Kingdom Halls, and they've realised that there is actually a way to free up this money, to liquidate these assets without necessarily getting rid of all the members, even if it means inconveniencing the members, even if it means taking advantage of them and exploiting them. So that was an astonishing little thing at the end of this month's broadcast, but it does nevertheless bring me to the end. I hope you found my observations on this month's broadcast interesting. I will obviously also be doing a rebuttal to the November broadcast, but that's pretty much it. Don't forget to subscribe to the John Cedars channel for more such videos, and as always, thank you for watching.